All right, let's get right into it. India, the world's biggest democracy, is on the verge of a huge political shakeup. Sometime after 2026, the country is going to completely redraw its electoral map. And this one process could fundamentally change the balance of power for decades to come.
And that question really gets to the heart of this whole thing. I mean, just imagine being told that because you did exactly what you were asked to do, because you successfully followed a national policy, you're now about to lose your say in how the country is run. It sounds crazy, right? But that is the exact dilemma facing millions of people. And that's what we're going to unpack.
So, what is this map redrawing thing anyway? Well, it's a process called delimitation, and it's become, believe it or not, one of the most high-stakes political issues in India today. So let's break down what it actually is and why it matters so much. At its core, delimitation is supposed to be pretty straightforward. It's like a routine democratic tune-up. As people are born, as they move around, populations change, so every now and then you have to redraw the lines of the voting districts to make sure every single vote carries about the same weight. It's a standard practice just to keep things fair. Yeah, this whole idea rests on a really simple but powerful democratic principle. One vote, one value. It just means your vote, cast in one part of the country, should have the same power as a vote cast anywhere else. Seems obvious, right? But as you're about to see, in the real world, it gets complicated fast. Now, to really get why this is all coming to a head right now, we have to look back a bit. Way back in 1976, India was getting really worried about its booming population. So, to encourage family planning, the government hit a giant pause button. They froze the number of parliamentary seats for each state based on the 1971 census. That freeze was supposed to be temporary, but it got extended, and now, after 2026, it's finally set to expire, unleashing 50 years of pent-up demographic change all at once. And that brings us to the absolute core of this conflict. Because over those last 5 decades, India's population didn't grow evenly. Not at all. A massive demographic divide has opened up between the northern and southern states, basically setting the stage for a huge political collision. And here it is. This is the paradox we started with. It turns out the southern states, well, they took that national call for population control very seriously, and they were incredibly successful. But now they're facing the consequences. A major loss of political power, all because their populations didn't grow as fast. They're literally being penalized for their success. The sheer scale of this power shift is just staggering. Based on the population projections, the northern states are on track to gain a whopping 43 seats in parliament. That is a massive injection of political clout. And of course, here's the other side of that same coin. At the same time, the southern states are projected to lose 24 seats. Now, this isn't some minor tweak. This is a fundamental transfer of political power from one entire region of the country to another. And when you look at the specific states, the numbers are just stark. A state like Uttar Pradesh could gain 17 seats. Bihar could gain 11. But then you look south. Tamil Nadu is projected to lose 9 seats. Kerala could lose 6. Suddenly, these abstract numbers become very real for the people living in those states. So, as you can probably guess, this has kicked off an incredibly intense debate. And what's crucial to understand here is that both sides have really legitimate arguments. They're just rooted in very different but equally important principles. Okay, so the South's argument is basically this. Hey, we're being punished for doing what the nation asked of us. Plus, we're the country's economic engines and our voices shouldn't be turned down. They see this as a major threat to India's federal balance, that delicate dance of power between the central government and the states. But the North, they're arguing from a pure democratic standpoint. They say, look, it's simple. Representation has to be based on population. We have more people and those people have greater needs. The freeze was always meant to be temporary and it's time to fix it. And you can see the story so clearly in the data on the total fertility rate. That's just the average number of children born per woman. You've got states like Bihar and Uttar Pradesh with rates way above the national average. And then you have a state like Kerala, way below it. This right here, this is the demographic engine that's driving this entire political earthquake. So why does all this political representation matter so much? Well, it all comes down to money. It's directly tied to funding from the central government. Losing seats in parliament can mean losing crucial funds, which could force states to cut back on things like education, healthcare, and sanitation. So the stakes for the day-to-day lives of millions are just incredibly high. With the stakes being that high, the search for a solution is, as you can imagine, pretty urgent.
There is a legislative idea floating around, but it's turning out to be just as controversial as the problem it's trying to solve.
Right, so a set of bills have been proposed that are really trying to navigate this political minefield. The goal is to manage the transition smoothly, but critics are already pointing out some pretty major potential problems.
So, what does this proposed solution do? A few big things. First, it dramatically increases the size of India's lower house of parliament, the Lok Sabha, to 850 seats. It does go back to allocating those seats based on population, but as a compromise, it uses the older 2011 census for now. And it would also finally make it possible to implement a long-promised policy of reserving seats for women. But, and this is a big but, here are the problems. Critics are arguing it gives whichever party is in power way too much control to decide when this happens and which census they get to use. And maybe most importantly, it doesn't actually solve the core issue. It still leads to that massive power shift from the south to the north, so it could end up making that regional divide even deeper than it already is. This whole dilemma has pushed a lot of smart people to look for more creative solutions. They're looking both inside India and also at how other big, diverse democracies handle this exact same problem. The goal is to find some way to balance the scales of democracy without tipping the whole thing over. And there are some really fascinating ideas out there. One is a kind of hybrid formula, where maybe you base half the seats on population, but the other half on things like economic contribution or development. People are also looking at international models. For example, the European Union uses this thing called digressive proportionality. It sounds complicated, but the idea is simple. Bigger countries get more seats, sure, but the smaller countries actually get more seats per person. This makes sure their voices don't just get drowned out. And then there's a simpler idea. Just a constitutional rule that guarantees a minimum number of seats for every single state, no matter what happens to its population. So we're left with this really fundamental question. How does a nation like India balance the pure power of a vote with the actual value of progress? How do you honor the principle of one person, one vote, while also recognizing and rewarding the states that did the right thing? There are no easy answers here, but finding one is going to define the very future of India's democracy.